When David McCullough sat down to work, he did it in an 8 by 10 foot shed in his backyard on Martha's Vineyard. In that shed, he wrote history and biography and became perhaps the most popular American historian of his generation, the author of best-selling and prize-winning books on John Adams, Harry Truman, the Wright brothers, the Brooklyn Bridge, and more.
David McCullough died on Sunday. He was 89. In 2011, I interviewed him at his home in Camden, where he spent part of the year, and we talked about the tools of his trade.
I've been writing on the same typewriter since 1965, and I bought it secondhand. It was 25 years old when I bought it. I've written everything I've ever written on it for 40-some years now, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's a Royal Standard typewriter, just exactly like that. A beautiful example of American manufacture, and this one's the same way. It works perfectly.
David McCullough was not an academic historian.
He was 35 when his first book came out, and he'd already held a variety of jobs in New York City, and one of those jobs taught him a lesson that would be supremely useful for a writer. People, I think, might be surprised to learn that one of your first jobs in the writing business was at the then new Sports Illustrated magazine.
That's right.
What did you do at Sports Illustrated?
Well, I was a trainee. They had a training program there when you first went to work, and I was put to work in the circulation promotion department. So I was writing promotion copy for circulation of the new magazine, which was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. I had an editor, for example, who had a big rubber stamp and said dull. And if you turned something in, and it would come back, just stamp, dull. Well, you wouldn't say why it was dull or what was wrong, but you got the message. And I've never, ever forgotten that.
That is great. David McCullough was also fiercely dedicated to seeing for himself the places he wrote about.
When we did this interview, it was about a book he'd written on Americans in France in the 1800s, and he spent time in Paris because he wanted to walk the streets and visit the cafes that dated back to the 19th century, which led to this exchange. As a historian, or simply as a traveler, you can go to places where history happened, and often the places are pretty much intact. What you can't do is actually go back to the time where things happened.
I'm not sure.
So let me crank up the time machine.
Yeah.
You can go to any place and any time in history that you want. Where would you go?
Well, having just spent 4 years on this project, I would go to Paris. I would give a hell of a lot to be able to sit down have a glass of wine or a cup of coffee with Oliver Wendell Holmes or Augustus St. Gaudens in a cafe on the left bank and just sit there and shoot the breeze for about 2 or 3 hours.
Even more than you'd rather chat with Teddy Roosevelt in South Dakota or John Adams in Philadelphia?
No, I'd meet Adams in Paris. And I'd run into Teddy Roosevelt when he was there on his honeymoon.
You're good. You're good. You're your own travel agent. David McCullough has a daughter who lives in Mid-Coast, Maine, and as we mentioned, we did that interview at his home in Camden, where he spent part of the year. Let's end on this note. You could live in Paris. If you really wanted to, you could probably pack up and go there right now, but you're living in Maine. You've been here for a while now. How do you like Maine?
Well, I love Maine. Our real home is in Massachusetts, and we go back and forth. I adore New England. I don't want to live anywhere else, not Paris either. I am like so many people who love New England. I love the ocean. I love the sea. I love the mountains. I love the skiing. I love the way the leaves turn in the autumn. Who wouldn't? But what I like best are the people. And the stories, the history. What city in America has more history than Boston? And to walk around Boston is a history lesson just in itself.
And I know that you paint.
Yes.
And I know that you have a great eye for light, and the light in Maine is very interesting. Have you been doing some painting and out taking advantage of some opportunities here?
I have, and I have done a great deal on Martha's Vineyard, and I've done some in Boston, and I paint mainly in watercolor, and I've gotten to be very fond of it. It clears your head in a way that nothing else that I know of does. You don't think about anything else. And you don't have to use any words.
What a gem.
He was a master of words. The books are really, really good. I've read a whole lot of his stuff, and I just love it all. Again, David McCullough died Sunday at the age of 89. The books that he wrote live on.